In a moment that has left both Africa and the world in shock, Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, uncovered a French operative hiding within his own military unit. The events that followed were gripping, filled with tension, intelligence maneuvering, and Traoré's bold leadership. His next move was unpredictable, and the international reaction was nothing short of explosive. The sun had just begun to rise over Ouagadougou when something unusual happened. President Ibrahim Traoré, in his usual routine of greeting soldiers at a military base, noticed a young man in uniform standing a bit too stiffly and saluting in a way that felt off too sharp to polished. Ibrahim didn't say anything at first. He simply nodded and moved on, but inside, his instincts flared. He had served in the field, and he knew the rhythm of a Burkinabe soldier, the unspoken bond, the brotherhood in their eyes. This man had none of that. Later that afternoon, Ibrahim quietly asked his chief of intelligence, Captain Ouagadougou, who is the new guy. The answer came back. We thought he came from the southern unit, but no one really knows him. Silence. Ibrahim stared out the window as a plane crossed the sky. Verify his file discreetly, he ordered. What had started as a routine inspection had turned into something far more serious. Deep down, he knew this was no ordinary soldier. That night, under the cover of dusk, Ibrahim gathered 3 of his most trusted officers in a back room of the presidential compound. Captain Ouagadougou brought the file, but there was a problem. No file existed. Not in the military archives, not in regional rosters, not in internal surveillance logs. The soldier who called himself Sergeant Tiamo was a ghost. Ibrahim said nothing for a long time. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of a fan cutting through the heat. Then he spoke. We will not panic. We will not arrest him, not yet. The others looked shocked, but Ibrahim continued. If this man is who I suspect, he's not alone. And if we act too soon, we may never know how deep this goes. A plan was formed. The next morning, the sergeant would be sent on a controlled operation, one that would allow them to track his movements, contacts, and communications. It was risky, dangerous, but Ibrahim Traoré was calm. Behind his quiet gaze was something far stronger than fear, a burning desire to protect his country. Without bloodshed, the week ahead would test everything. By mid-morning the next day, Sergeant Tiamo was on a staged mission performing a security check. Along the edge of a crowded marketplace, Ibrahim watched from a nearby rooftop, dressed in plain clothes, and shielded by the shadows of 2 plainclothes guards. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to listen. As the sergeant moved, his radio crackled too quietly for the average person to hear, but not for the device Ibrahim's team had planted in his vest. What came through next froze the air. Confirm intel on Traoré's location. Repeat. Confirm visual on the target. The voice wasn't speaking any local dialect. It was pure Parisian French, clean and coded. Ibrahim's heart clenched. This wasn't just espionage. This was an international breach. At that moment, a child bumped into the fake sergeant and dropped a basket of mangoes. The man didn't even flinch, but Ibrahim noticed something chilling. The sergeant instinctively reached to his side, where a hidden firearm was strapped beneath his uniform. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a trained foreign agent. And now, the president was watching him live. The world would never be the same after what happened next. With his inner circle gathered over bitter coffee in a small, unmarked room beneath the presidential quarters, the air was thick with tension. Captain Ouagadougou's voice trembled as he played the recording again. Confirm intel on Traoré's location. There was no doubt now. The room fell into stunned silence. One general stood up, fists clenched. Give the order, we'll take him down tonight. But Ibrahim raised his hand gently. No, he said, and everyone turned to look. We don't just have a spy, we have a message. They think we're not watching. They think we're weak. Ibrahim leaned forward, his eyes hard with clarity. But Burkina Faso is not a playground for foreign powers. Not anymore. Then, his next instruction shocked everyone. Let him roam. Feed him what we want him to believe, but make sure he never sees the real picture. Why? Because Ibrahim didn't want just one spy. He wanted the entire network. That night, Ibrahim sat alone after everyone left. staring at an old photo of his late mother. "I promised you," he whispered, "no more chains on our soil." The next 24 hours would test that promise like never before. The French embassy in Ouagadougou was unusually quiet that morning. Inside, a nervous agent whispered into a secured line, "He's not reacting. He's waiting. It's strange." On the other end, a cold voice replied, "Then provoke him." Or meanwhile, Ibrahim received word that the so-called Sergeant Tiogo had sent encrypted messages during the night. One of them contained GPS coordinates of the presidential convoy's route. Scheduled for the next day, they were planning something. Yet Ibrahim's response shocked even his intelligence chief. "Change the route. Leak the old one. You want them to strike an empty car?" Ouagadougou asked. "No," Ibrahim replied. "I want them to believe they did. Let's see how they celebrate failure." And so, that evening, the decoy convoy moved slowly through the capital, exactly at 7:40 p.m. It was hit by a remote blast. The world was told, "President Traoré may be dead." News outlets across Europe ran the headline within minutes. But in a hidden location outside the city, Ibrahim watched the flames on a security feed. "This is how you pull out the serpent," he said quietly. "Let them think they've won." Back in a dusty village near Dougou, an old woman screamed when she heard the news on the radio. "Traoré is gone," the broadcaster said. She dropped the calabash in her hands and it shattered. "Impossible," she cried, falling to her knees. For many like her, Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just a leader. He was hope wrapped in skin, the son of the land who had faced down chaos with dignity. The man who slept on mats with soldiers, who visited orphanages in secret, who never forgot the poor. By nightfall, tears flooded the streets of Ouagadougou. Candles were lit. Songs of mourning began. Children sat silently around fires, whispering his name like a prayer. But the real Ibrahim was watching it all from an underground facility. His heart broke at the pain he had caused. But he didn't flinch. "Sometimes," he whispered, "truth must wear a mask before it can be seen." Then came the call. The French agent had moved, and he wasn't alone. Ibrahim looked up at the ceiling, breathing in deeply. "This is it," he said. The game had entered its final stage, and none of them were ready for what would come next. Night fell quietly over Ouagadougou, but inside the National Intelligence Center, everything was moving fast. The French operative, real name Jean-Luc Morel, had contacted someone in the northern region. The call was brief, coded, and untraceable, but Traoré was one step ahead. "We'll give him what he wants," Ibrahim said. A fake military memo was created, marked top secret, describing a weapons deal between Burkina Faso and a so-called Eastern power. It was bait. By dawn, Jean-Luc had taken the document and vanished from his barracks. Ibrahim watched silently as the GPS tracker hidden in the folder activated. "He's going to the safe house," whispered Captain Ouagadougou. Ibrahim didn't smile. Instead, he turned to his aide and said, "No one gets hurt. Not even him. But he's the enemy. No, he's a pawn. The real enemy is hiding behind the flag." As the sun rose, a small convoy followed Jean-Luc's path, not to arrest him, but to see who he would meet. One mistake, one misstep, and the entire mission could fall apart. But Ibrahim believed something stronger than fear was on his side: truth. And it was getting closer. The safe house was hidden behind an old, the warehouse on the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso appeared abandoned to the outside world. Rusted roof, cracked walls, no movement. But inside, the truth unfolded like wildfire. Jean-Luc met with two men in civilian clothes. One had a scar across his jaw, the other held a briefcase. Traoré's surveillance team listened in through tiny microphones hidden under the floorboards. The scarred man growled, "We need disruption. Send false orders, communications. The West will step in when the chaos breaks." Jean-Luc hesitated, but his calm demeanor didn't go unnoticed. "He's too calm. He's not reacting like they said." Scarjaw slammed the table. "Then make him react." Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim clenched his jaw as he heard those words. His eyes didn't blink. He leaned over and spoke softly into the radio. "Pull back. We're not ready." The trap was working. But this operation wasn't about vengeance. It was about protecting a future, Outside the safe house, an old man watched quietly. A retired soldier. He sent a text to his son. Tell the president they're not alone in this. Hope was spreading like wildfire, too, and the president, he was preparing his most unexpected move yet. That night, Ibrahim walked into the small studio inside the intelligence base. He stood before a plain camera, no flags, no titles, just a leader and his people. He looked tired, but calm. People of Burkina Faso, he began, his voice steady. You may have heard the news that I am gone, that I've been silenced. He paused. But I am speaking to you tonight not as a ghost, but as your son. The broadcast was kept secret, shared only across secured lines to trusted elders, village heads, and youth leaders. From radios in huts to phones in city cafes, people listened in, tears in their eyes. We are being watched, and some who claim to help us are planting snakes in our house. His voice grew firmer. But this land is sacred. No force will break us, not by gun, not by lies. Somewhere in Paris, someone shut off the video feed and raged. But in Burkina Faso, old women wept. A boy whispered to his brother, he's still here. And at that moment, even the trees seemed to stand still. Traoré's message had gone beyond the airwaves, it had entered hearts. And now, the world would feel it. The tension in the capital was unbearable. It was as if the entire country was holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. Ibrahim Traoré had uncovered a secret that shook the very foundation of his military. A French operative, one of the few trusted by the regime, had been discovered in the ranks, not as a soldier, but as a spy. A traitor planted to destabilize the fragile peace carved from years of violence. Ibrahim had always been the calm in the storm, the man who spoke of unity in a divided country. But even he couldn't ignore the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at him. His every decision mattered more than ever, and this discovery could change the course of history. It was a delicate moment. The world had its eyes on Burkina Faso, but Ibrahim knew he had to act quickly. In the secrecy of his office, he sat alone for hours, reviewing intelligence reports. This was bigger than politics. This was about protecting his people, about defending the values of his nation. Do what's necessary, he muttered to himself. The next move will be the hardest yet. News of the French spy spread quietly, at first like a rumor whispered. In the dark corners of the barracks, Ibrahim's leadership was being tested. And it wasn't just the enemy he had to outmaneuver. It was his own people, too. A secret meeting was called his inner circle. Trusted officers, intelligence agents, and advisors gathered in the dimly lit war room. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Ibrahim walked in, his gaze scanning the faces of his men. He was the embodiment of strength, but there was an undeniable weight on his shoulders. Traitor or not, we must be careful, one advisor cautioned. If we expose this, it could provoke a reaction from France. Ibrahim's eyes narrowed. I don't fear France. I fear what happens to our people if we do nothing. The room fell silent. Ibrahim's calmness was unsettling. His poise, his deep understanding of the stakes, was unsettling. In this critical moment, no one dared to speak against him. This was his moment of control. The operative will be dealt with, Ibrahim said, his voice firm. But we won't rush. We'll move when the time is right. Strategically, everyone nodded, but deep inside, they knew a storm was coming. They couldn't foresee the international fallout, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was the calm before the storm. An hour before dawn, Ibrahim made the call. The decision had been made. No more secrets, no more waiting. He was going to expose the French operative in a way no one expected. A public announcement was scheduled. The entire world would hear the truth. The hidden French operative wasn't just a spy. He was the symptom of a much larger issue, a web of foreign influence that had been slowly suffocating Burkina Faso for years. As Ibrahim prepared for the address, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. This wasn't just about exposing one man, it was about shaking the very foundations of power, about showing the world that Africa was no longer willing to sit in the shadows of foreign influence. The press conference was broadcast live. As the cameras rolled, Ibrahim stepped up to the podium. His face was expressionless but resolute. The truth is now clear, he began, his voice steady. A soldier among us was not a soldier, but a spy sent by foreign hands. This is a betrayal. We will not tolerate. The room fell into stunned silence. This is not just an accusation. This is a warning to all those who wish to exploit the sovereignty of our nation. Burkina Faso will stand tall. No one will undermine our people, not anymore. The room exploded with questions. The international community was in shock. Burkina Faso had just made a bold statement, one that could change the geopolitical landscape. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. His leadership was more than just a speech. It was a declaration of independence, and it was heard around the world. The news spread like wildfire. Burkina Faso had uncovered a French operative in its ranks, and the world was watching. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the center of the storm, the weight of his nation's future pressing heavily on his shoulders. The capture of the spy, codenamed Leopard, had sent shockwaves through the military and political establishment. But now, the next step had to be taken with utmost caution. As Ibrahim walked through the halls of his presidential palace, the constant murmur of conversations surrounded him. His advisors, military officials, and security experts all had their own theories about what should be done. Some called for immediate retaliation, while others urged caution. But Ibrahim knew this wasn't an ordinary situation. This was bigger than one man or one incident. Ibrahim, his trusted advisor Amadou, called as he entered the room. The world is waiting for your move. France has already begun issuing statements. They're calling this a provocation. Ibrahim's gaze hardened. He had known the stakes from the beginning, but he also knew that the people of Burkina Faso had long been held under the influence of foreign powers. This was his moment to define the nation's future. The tension in the room was palpable as Ibrahim sat down to address his military commanders. They all stood at attention, awaiting his orders. The spy was locked away, but the situation was far from resolved. Ibrahim knew the risks. Exposing the French agent could lead to diplomatic isolation or worse, but doing nothing, that wasn't an option. I have always believed in one principle, Ibrahim began, his voice calm but firm. Burkina Faso must remain sovereign. Our decisions must reflect our interests, not those of foreign powers. We cannot be pawns in a game we did not choose. The commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them had been in the military for decades, and they knew the consequences of angering a global power like France. But Ibrahim's words struck a chord. I will not back down, he continued. We have already lost too much to foreign interference. It is time to act, but we must do so carefully. The plan began to take shape, a calculated move to expose the French operative while safeguarding Burkina Faso's dignity. But Ibrahim's next steps would require a delicate balance between diplomacy and defiance. Within hours of Ibrahim's statement, the international press erupted. France had issued a formal condemnation, accusing Burkina Faso of reckless behavior and sabotaging diplomatic relations. Other Western powers quickly followed suit, with voices from Europe and the United States calling for sanctions and isolation. At home, however, Ibrahim's popularity soared. The streets of Ouagadougou were filled with people chanting his name, rallying behind his bold stand against foreign manipulation. It was a bittersweet victory. For every supporter, there was a new challenge to face. Ibrahim stood in his office, watching the protests outside through his window. He had expected the backlash, but seeing it in person was a different matter. The stakes had become clearer than ever. This was no longer about a single incident. It was about the future of Burkina Faso's independence. We're in uncharted waters now, Captain Amadou said, entering the room. The people are with you, but the world is against us. Ibrahim nodded, knowing full well that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but his course was set. Let them come. We will stand firm. His decision had set the world on fire, and now he had to navigate the flames with precision, knowing that every move could lead to either victory or disaster. The pressure was mounting, with the world watching. Ibrahim Traoré stood on the precipice of a decision that could define the future of his nation. The discovery of the French operative within the ranks of the Burkinabe military had turned the world upside down. Now, the clock was ticking. What was his next move? He gathered his trusted advisors in a dimly lit room, their faces tense with anticipation. Amadou, his military strategist, looked uneasy, while the rest of the room remained silent, knowing that whatever decision Ibrahim made next would reverberate far beyond their borders. "I've thought long and hard," Ibrahim said, his voice calm but firm. "We can't let this go. This isn't just about the operative. This is about Burkina Faso's sovereignty." The air was thick with uncertainty, but Ibrahim's decision was made. He would confront the French government directly, making public the operative's identity and actions. This was not a small risk, it was a gamble. If he was wrong, the world might condemn him. If he was right, it could spark an international crisis. "I will make our stand known," Ibrahim declared. "The world must understand that Burkina Faso will no longer bow down to foreign interests." As soon as Ibrahim's announcement hit the news, the world reacted in shock. The French government condemned the actions of Burkina Faso, demanding an explanation, while other Western nations lined up to back France. They accused Ibrahim of endangering international peace and inciting instability in the region. But back in Burkina Faso, the streets were alive with excitement. People were rallying behind Ibrahim, holding up signs that read "sovereignty above all" and chanting his name. The general public felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Finally, a leader who wasn't afraid to stand up to foreign interference. International leaders quickly voiced their opposition, warning of sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The tension was palpable. Would Burkina Faso face a future of sanctions, starvation, and isolation, or would they emerge victorious as symbol of resistance for other nations tired of foreign manipulation? The air was electric with uncertainty, but Ibrahim knew one thing: the people of Burkina Faso had placed their faith in him, and he would not let them down. The world watched in awe as the next chapter of the crisis unfolded. Diplomatic talks began, but no one expected the outcome Ibrahim was about to present. Instead of escalating the conflict, Ibrahim's bold move was not one of war, but one of diplomacy. With the world on edge, Ibrahim surprised everyone. Instead of military action, he invited a delegation of international leaders, including French diplomats, to a summit in Ouagadougou. There, in front of the global community, he laid out the facts: the presence of the French operative, the breach of trust, and the need for Burkina Faso's sovereignty to be respected. The summit was tense. The world's most powerful figures sat in silence as Ibrahim calmly but powerfully addressed them, demanding respect for his country's autonomy. The French delegation was visibly shaken. They had underestimated this young, unyielding leader. They had hoped for an easy political game, but Ibrahim's mastery of diplomacy and leadership had turned the tables. The result, not a war, but a long overdue conversation about true sovereignty and respect for Africa's independence. For the first time, Burkina Faso was seen not as a nation vulnerable to exploitation, but as a proud country taking charge of its destiny. As the summit concluded, a new chapter in Africa's history began. Ibrahim Traoré, through his courage, intelligence, and unmatched poise, had won not only for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of bravery, leadership, and sovereignty. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you feel proud of Burkina Faso's leadership, please leave a like, comment, and share your thoughts.